I hope everyone is ready for the next talk. Everybody is ready to know why Stefan cannot believe it's not an attribute. So please, warm welcome for Stefan.
Yeah, hi again. I only came up with this yesterday, so forgive my poor paint skills, but I guess it's okay. A more proper title would be how can I present settings with virtual attributes in Rails applications. Not as catchy as this, but we'll get to this later. So I started working with Ruby on Rails in 2008, and over the years I came across several recurring problems when it came to implementing certain features in Rails applications, especially when using the database. The first one is having application-like settings. One can argue that this is a good or bad pattern, but what I saw often is a changing application name that can include like an Easter egg on Easter or a Christmas egg on Christmas, and things like a, like a contact email that might change over time, a Google Place ID, or styling for the Google Maps thing that can be changed in the database, or yeah, the other thing. So yeah, what do you do in these cases? You create a table, you call it application settings, has a name and a value, and then you create all these nice settings, and you can change them over time. So you have this single purpose key value store for your application-wide settings. You can do that, but once it gets more, it might get a bit ugly. With more, we come to user-specific settings. Let's say we have an application that consists of a lot of table views, and in certain areas this is still pretty common. Let's say we have a users list. You all know these little drop-downs at one corner that ask you how many items would you like to see per page. And for myself, I get really annoyed if the system doesn't remember what I chose there. So next time I get there, after I chose 30, it's back to 10. So what you might do is you have a nice users table and you say, okay, once the user chose something, I want to save it in the database. So I add a nice column that is users per page for the user list, defaults to 10, and I can update it. And next time the user comes back, I can set him to his desired count. Looks okay for now, right? But let's say we have a second one. Okay, now we have users per page and posts per page. And let's say we have 20 more. Might get a bit messy in the users table, right? So what do we do as nice database architects in this case? Either we use a bit famous sometimes, I feel, serialize function in Ruby or Ruby on Rails. Does everyone know what serialize does in a model? Okay, short excursion. Basically, you have to add a text field to your database, and afterwards you can put whatever object you like into this field as long as you write serialize my field name. It's automatically serialized, and once it's loaded from the database again, you get your hash, your array, your complex object back. As I said, probably not the nice thing you can do, but it works. In this case, you can see at the bottom, see my mouse? Very, very good. I just call my serialized attributes, I try to get the user's key out of it, and if I don't find it, I take it from the defaults, which can be found up here. At least I don't need 20 columns in my users table now, but it's still not really the nicest thing you can do. You could write some helper methods to get around this, having to know that it's a serialized attribute that's supposed to be a hash, and so on and so on. After this, you might think, well, if I need so many of them, why don't I create my own model and my own database table for it, which I call view count setting. So now we have general setting or application setting and view count setting, and work with the has many association. Works, but then you have one table in your application that is only there for saving how many items on a table each user would like to see. Seems a bit wasteful, right? And as I said before, I don't really want to put this stuff into my database. Neither this application setting thing, nor 20 columns in my user, nor a table that only counts how many items the user wants to see. So the third thing is what I had in my current job. By the way, I work for the guys who gave you the coffee this year. have quite often in a startup is, hey, we need a certain thing, we need to keep track of how many users this user invited for our campaign next week so we can give them a prize. Or we have posts in our system, kind of a social network, and we don't want users for this post to have 5 reactions, we want them to have 2. So these are things for either a presentation, so you have a deadline and you know afterwards I can remove this thing again, or it's something very experimental that might as well go away with the next release or with the next week. What options do I have? Again, the same. I can add something to a table, I can create a new model or table, or I start serializing. So again, why should I put migrations into my my code base if I know that I revert them 1 week later? It gets bigger and bigger, and as I said, over the years, with these problems reoccurring again and again, this might get a bit annoying. So, what to do? In the end, the solutions I proposed before are not bad. I just don't want them to be in my application 20 times each. So, I thought of something that uses, in the end, all 3 of them, but only once in my code base. So, we take the first approach we had with application settings. We just call it settings. It's in the end just a key value store. It has a name and a value. But remember these items per page thing, I also allow them to be assigned to another record, in this case to a user in my application. So now I can create a setting that is named users per page, it has the value 30 and is assigned to user.first. Yeah, so what came out of it? I don't know if the name is matching anymore, but I called it setting accessors, and it's basically exactly this. You have your global key value store with a nice interface. You can set the meaning of life, you can read the meaning of life. With different forms of syntactic sugar, it gets worse the lower you get in this case. But just so you understand a bit what's happening under the hood. So basically this creates a setting which is not assigned to any user or any other record. And you can use it for whatever you want, for application title, for a contact address, whatever. Yesterday there was a talk which says explicitly it does not use method missing. This explicitly uses method missing a lot, just so you're warned. Otherwise, things like the first 2 lines wouldn't be possible, unfortunately. Exactly, and as I said, you can assign different records in your application. So let's say we have multiple universes. The one uses 42, but for my second one, I really want it to be 43 because it's important, and I can do so pretty easily. Syntax is mostly the same. You only have one additional attribute. This is just a short example how I actually used this to set the items per page for different views in my application. So this is for those of you, well, probably all of you, use Rails. This is automatic controller path. For example, users controller would be users, and action name is, for example, show or index. I just have users index through the join, and I set this setting when the user selects a different value. I set it to users index with the params per page, which is 30 in my case, and for the current user. And next time the user comes back, I get the value back, or if the user didn't set it yet, I set it to 30 or whatever my default value is. Looks already pretty neat when it comes to cases where I don't really know how many different settings I need. For example, in this case, I don't have to worry about additional views in my application anymore because it will work automatically with new lists. However, this is still a bit clunky when it comes to new features. For example, oh yeah, this is covered, really. And these are party parrots. If you don't know them, look up the cult of the, or covenant of the party parrot. It's worth it. So yeah, what I needed for my second case, which is experimental or throwaway features, is a bit nicer solution to integrate this into my models. So in the end, the first line you see there, setting accessor, I'd say it tricks active record into thinking this is an actual database column and attribute it can work on. So every user from now on has an attribute that is called invited users of the type integer, and by default it is 0. So as you can see, I can use it exactly as I would with a normal database column here. I can set it to 1, I can do plus equals 1, I can save it, everything. So, okay. And I also have the serializing magic I talked about before. You can create setting accessors which with a type of, I call it polymorphic, which can be in the end everything you want it to be. Just don't save objects with 30 other objects in them in there, otherwise your database will cry somewhere. So in this case, my case of allowed reactions for a post, I simply say, okay, all posts have by default happy, sad, and thinking, but my first post, I don't really want people to think about it, so just get the pure reactions out of them, happy and sad. So I can do this exactly like you would expect with an array attribute in active record. And as I said, it behaves exactly like a normal attribute on active record would, so you can call validations on it. You can, in the end, you can do everything you would on a normal attribute, including all these helper methods that you used or didn't use yet. So you can change one of my accessors. You can ask, did the user change through this? Was this attribute changed? What was the old value before the user changed? What was it before it was typecast? As you can see here, I assigned a string to an integer value, and Rails does a bit, or Active Record does a bit of magic automatically when assigning it. So you get all these nice features that you are used to from Active Record, and in the end, you don't even know anymore that it's not a real attribute. So, and that gives us experimental features and temporary features without having to change the database again. So when my boss comes to me, hey, we need this for next week, I can just say, oh, okay, just have to add one line to the code and probably a few more to set the value, but no database changes that I have to revert again. This is not the solution for everything, but it's been in production in several systems over the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years, and it worked pretty well. So until now, nothing really broke. Yeah, about the second part of it. I ran into a few problems when keeping this up to date with the changes Active Record made over the years. And what I mean by that, as I said, this behaves just like Active Record does. The problem is sometimes Active Record doesn't really know how it behaves itself, or it changes pretty drastically. Let's take a look at this example. I don't know if you've tried it with anything other than 1 or 0, which the Rails form helpers gives you, but you can assign the string moin to a Boolean attribute in your record. So what would you think is the outcome for the first line? Is it moin, nil, false, true? It's true? No, it isn't. It's false. And this is exactly one of the problems I ran into. In everything prior to Rails 5, it's false, but from Rails 5, it's true, which makes sense because everything that is not nil or false should be true in Ruby. It's a bit more difficult here because when you assign a 1 to it, it's actually true as well. When you assign a 0, it's false, which is a bit of convenience. However, I didn't know this, and yeah, my tests showed me this, and I was quite a bit confused. But luckily, I don't know how many of you used appraisal before. Very good, very good. You can see it in a lot of gems, and you can use it to test against multiple versions of the same gem at once. So basically, your normal applications have one gem file. My application has, I think, currently 4 or 5 gem files. And these are all executed after each other, in this case in Travis CI. As you can see here, for each Ruby version I support, and with each Rails version I support. So yeah, when it comes to Active Record, there are some things I don't really expect to change at least the outcome. So when I change a record and I ask, are you changed? I always expect it to be true. So there shouldn't be any surprises there. So what I have in my tests are basically, I change the record and I expect it to be changed. I really hope that Active Record 6 doesn't come up with any surprises there, because this is still something I have to test and I'm a bit afraid of it. But there are other things. Oh yeah, this is, for example, when I save my record and anything was changed, then I expect the updated add timestamp to be changed as well. By the way, this is something that changed in Active Record 5.1. Because before you only had to call save and it would automatically touch it. From 5.1 it got really performant out of a sudden, and it actually checks if anything was changed. And if none of the real attributes changed, it doesn't touch the record. This surprised me a bit, and I actually had to insert my first version switch in there to alter or to get around this behavior. But anyway, the tests can always stay as they are, because this behavior should be set in stone. What's not set in stone, as I said with the Boolean attribute before, are things like type conversions, or what Rails sometimes sets as default value. This is a bit bigger part of code, but in the end it's pretty easy to understand. I have a converter in my gem, in this case a Boolean converter. It gets a value and it tries to make a Boolean out of it. This is what it does. And with model basically creates an active record model on the fly, so I don't have to have this dummy application that some of you probably know from older gems in my tests anymore. So in the end, I have my converter and I say, okay, it's expected to convert the number 1, similar to what active record does on the Boolean attribute. And I just do this for all values that came to my mind. So strings, floats, integers, really true and false values, and finally nil. So as this actually tests against how does active record do this internally, I'm at least pretty confident that I know in the future when a new Rails version will break this, because as soon as I add another gem file and it does something weird, my tests will actually fail and I can fix it. And with the fix, I can still be sure that my old versions are still supported. So yeah, I hope this works the way I planned it. I probably didn't cover everything, so I would be open for a discussion about some technical aspects of this. Does any one of you have questions about how something is implemented, what problems were or something? Yep. Oh, sorry.
Hey, thank you for your talk. Nice one, really. And the question is about the performance and how you deal when you need to read the settings all the time.
Kind of expected the question. Currently, I do this lazily, which is not the most important thing database-wise, because when you first request a setting, it's loaded. I have a wrapper which actually holds all the settings for a record, which are created through the setting accessor. 1 second. So basically, the user has an internal attribute that holds, or internal hash that holds all the settings. So what you could do is, you could eagerly fetch them when you fetch the user. I didn't implement this yet, but it's something you can definitely do, and then you don't have to load them. Yeah.
And then you have a problem with cache invalidation. I mean that, yeah, when you have several instances of settings.
Exactly. This doesn't really solve all issues you can have, and I already ran into a lot of them. This is by no means finished, and I would be glad to get some contributors who point this out and actually also find solutions for it. Yeah, thanks for that. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Hi.
Oh, sorry.
Hi. Do you apply freedom patching, or how do you hook into Active Record? Is there because is this you just talked about stable interfaces? Do you expect that it breaks regularly on updates, or?
I try to be as less invasive to the actual implementation as possible. Generally, I create. If I get out of this presentation, I can actually show it to you. These MacBooks with touch bar, no real escape key. 1 second. Basically, when I call my, where are you? My gem? Okay, maybe I just tell you instead. Sorry about that. Basically, when you call setting accessor, it generates a bunch of methods in your application, in your class, which are called like the setting name you chose. So you get def invited user, def invited user equals, def invited user was, and so on, which is then passed to an internal state of settings for this class. I had to override some internal functions, for example, for changed attributes, because I didn't find another way. There are some internal functions like a mutation observer, or attribute mutation observer, it's called, I think, in Rails, but I didn't dive into this yet. This might be a better way to do this. So I expect these two methods I basically overloaded. Those might break. I hope not, but the general functionality should be pretty stable, except for when something like the Boolean thing changes again.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm curious for your opinion. I'd love to hear your opinion, not just as a software developer, but also as a software user. How do you prefer to have more or fewer settings?
Depends. Depends on the application, I think. If there are 3 settings and they are designed in a way that they cover exactly what I want, so they each switch internally 5 settings that the user doesn't see, this is fine for me. But for example, when it comes to Google or Facebook's privacy settings, I would pretty much want to have all the freedom I want in there. So in the end, the fewer the better, because it's easier for users to understand. Sometimes I wish for an easy and a pro mode. So easy mode just combines multiple settings at once for best user convenience, and a pro mode where you can tweak everything you want.
Thank you.
Hi. Do you have plans to support other ORMs?
Currently not, and it's currently not really built, so it would be easy to work on another ORM, unfortunately. Yeah, maybe in the future, but currently no plans.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Stefan. Okay, I have a question about, is there the danger that the settings table might degenerate because you put a lot of experimental stuff in there and some of this gets removed later on, but some of that is successful, right? And it has actually to be transferred into the proper tables. But everything works already, so I don't know, maybe your product owner says then, why do you have to put so much work into that refactoring now? It works now. So I see there is a danger, but how do you cope with that?
Good question. It actually happened in the past. So let's say we have this invited user setting, and now we decide we really want this in our application, so we make it a real column. So in this case, we need a database migration which adds the field to the user, and in the same deploy, I can simply remove this setting accessor. What I then do is, in an own migration or the same one, I go over all settings with the name invited users and simply put them into the real column in the database. When it comes to things I want to throw away, I can also iterate over the settings or simply call destroy all for all of them with the same name. So this, in my experience, works pretty well with either throw away or implement correctly. Does this answer your question, or?
Hi, thanks for your talk. I have a question concerning this example about the posts and the allowed reactions. So I thought if I wanted to add a 4th possible reaction, and like I have like 1 million posts, does that mean I would have to create a data migration that puts this 4th allowed reaction into the settings table for every post, like 1 million inserts for that, or does it work differently?
You mean to add a default reaction that every post and every new post should have, right?
No. A fourth possible reaction, like say neutral, and you want to allow this reaction for every post. So would you have to create a setting for every post then that allows this neutral reaction?
You would have to create a setting for every post that had custom reactions before. So you first would add it to the defaults over here, so every post that doesn't have an own setting would get the 4 reactions. If I have something like this before, and then I want to have happy, sad, and what do you say?
Neutral. or
Neutral.
whatever.
Happy, sad, and neutral, I'd actually have to update these settings, yes. But in the end, this was also this was already a decision by someone to only give this post happy and sad. So I think it's okay if a new reaction comes in that this is another database migration or rake task, for example. What we do sometimes is we create a single-purpose rake task, which is called after deployment, and then migrates these fields without having to actually add a migration. Sometimes it's cleaner, sometimes not. Always depends on the solution.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, so thank you very much.